fighting for? Why can't people help people? That's the question.
Oh my gosh, it's people helping people!
Tonight's episode of People Helping People Live is sponsored by Mike Silkowski. He's your local partner in getting your message in front of the right people. Mike specializes in helping businesses right here in Southern Arizona reach their ideal customers through TV and streaming services. He's not just sponsoring this chapter 3 of People Helping People, he's building partnerships, and he doesn't succeed unless you do. If you're ready to grow your business with someone who's invested in your success, call Mike at 515-305-5311. Again, that's 515-305-5311. This episode of People Helping People Live is sponsored by T-Town Boxing, Tucson's home for boxing, kickboxing, and recovery classes for all ages. From kids to adults, beginners to experienced fighters, T-Town Boxing offers a space to grow, train, and challenge yourself. So if you're ready to push your limits and join an amazing community, reach out to T-Town Boxing on Instagram at instagram.com/T-Town-Boxing or their website, boxingtucson.com. Again, that's instagram.com/T-Town-Boxing or their website, boxingtucson.com. This episode is sponsored by the Diabetes Network of Arizona, a community built by people living with type 1 diabetes for people living with type 1 diabetes. They host Arizona's only family camp for type 1 diabetics, giving kids and family a place to connect, learn, and feel understood. Every dollar raised stays right here in Arizona, helping local families get the care and supplies that they need. No one should ever face diabetes alone, and with your help, they don't have to. You can make a difference today by clicking the donation link in the description. The Diabetes Network of Arizona, building a stronger, healthier Arizona together. Let's get back into the episode.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another amazing episode of People Helping People. Come on, man. Feels good. I'm so excited to be here today. And if it is your first time joining us, this is a live podcast, meaning you can get involved in the conversation. So if you have questions, comments, feedback, leave it below in the comment box. We'll be sure to shout you out and address whatever it is that's on your mind. I am extremely excited about today's episode. We have an incredible guest with us today. He is a jack of all trades. And I feel like that's such a common theme with all these entrepreneurs that we've been having on the show and people that are out there taking on the jellies. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to our friend, Alan Mueller. There he is. Welcome to the show. Oh, and we lost him just like that. Welcome to the live show, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys are joining us for the first time, as I said, this is a live show. So we do have technical difficulties from time to time, whether it be on the guest side or on our side. Sometimes it's on the streaming services side. I mean, this stuff happens, man. This stuff happens. But while we're waiting for Alan to come back, I don't know if you guys saw, but Wednesday's episode was a huge learning lesson. And it just seems like one of the most simple things. But I shot an entire podcast. It luckily was a solo podcast, so we didn't waste anybody's time. But I shot that whole podcast with the mic muted. So again, things happen, right? Let's see. Oh, look, he's back in the house. All right, let's pull him in. Ladies and gentlemen, another warm welcome for our guest, Alan Mueller.
What's up? What's up? Sorry about the tech glitch. Life.
It's all good, man. It's all good. Yeah, we run and gun here. So sometimes, that's just what it is, but we're glad to have you here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm
Hello?
I'm losing you a little bit here and there. So, I'm just gonna cross my fingers. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's shoot for it, man. Let's see if we can make it work. For the people that don't know, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah. So I'm Alan Mueller, and I'm on the East Coast over here in North Carolina. I used to work in colleges and universities for about 20 years. And I was like, not what you think of when you think of colleges and universities. Like most people think of professors, but I worked in what they call student affairs. So it's all those things that make college tick outside the classroom. It's your career center, it's your residence halls, it's the office where you want to start a club or the multicultural office, all those things that make college like a little city. Did that for about 20 years. And now I'm a leadership consultant. And it's interesting because I'm one of the few people around that's got a doctorate in leadership that was also an improv comedian for the better part of a decade. And so, trust me when I say that opens some weird doors, y'all. It opens some fascinating doors. And so, I travel all over the country. I mean, the last 2 months, I've been in Long Beach, California, Richmond, Virginia, Orlando, Florida, doing my thing. And I was not that great of an improv comedian, but I'm a darn good keynote speaker because keynotes are boring usually until you got an improv guy up there. So.
I love that, man. It is so interesting because, for one, I want to thank you for coming on to the show. You reached out to me, and we had a conversation on the phone. And our conversation was so interesting because of the fact that you took two things that I thought were worlds apart, and you molded the two together, and you found this harmony in the two of those things and how they could work together and really make something special. So let's go ahead, if you can kind of unpack how you found this marriage of the two.
Yeah. So the funny story is I used to run a career center at a college, a conference for career coaches, and replaced their regular keynote speaker with an improv troupe. And it was the coolest thing ever. I had never done
Mm.
improv before. A buddy of mine from another university that was about an hour down the road, we did an improv scene together. We didn't know what we were doing. And we were co-owners of a Waffle House franchise. And one of us accused the other one of running around with his wife or something. I mean, we had some fun. And it's funny because I went back to the office the next week, and I'm in a career center. It's not glamorous, it's not sexy, it's kind of boring, right? It's helping students with resumes and helping them with internships. And we were doing like our practice interview week, and I looked at all my career counselors. I'm like, wait a second, every job interview anyone's ever going to do is improv. All
Mm.
job interviews are improv. And so something just hit me like a bolt of lightning. I'm like, I'm going to start teaching a class, teaching improv techniques to get people better at job interviews. So that was the first thing. And I went to a comedy club in my local community, started taking an improv class so I could get ready for this, and did it. And I wasn't, it was learn as you go. It was like rocking and rolling. I didn't quite have a full game plan yet. And then before you know it, I saw more and more applications of once you learn the skills of improv, I used to think improv was just creative people being hilarious, like Wayne Brady and Robin Williams up there just being geniuses. But there's actually a lot of rules. There's a lot of rules. And so once you learn the rules, along the way, I was also learning the rules of being a good leader, right? And I found all these parallels, man. I mean, it was like, and it sort of crept up on me over time. But now, I work with executives and managers and mid-level folks, teaching them how to use improv comedy techniques to be better in front of their teams, to listen more closely, to develop more empathy, more humility, more team mindset instead of individual mindset. So there's so many things that you have to do in improv to do it right that make you a better leader. Yeah.
Man, that is so interesting. And I love what you said there, that there are so many parallels with improv and being a leader and all these different assets of your life, right? There are things that we carry as individuals that, or maybe we're working towards where improv could be implemented. Now, give me the fundamentals of improv and how that is positively impacting people.
Yeah. So anybody
So
who's ever read a book about improv, or if you've heard Tina Fey talk about it, or other, major comedians, the number one rule is what we call the yes and rule. So you're doing an improv scene and your partner says, here, hold my candlestick. Yes and means I got to say yeah, and now I'm going to go kill Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick, right? I'm going to lean in. I'm going to make the scene about Clue. I can't block it. I can't say that's not a candlestick, that's a snake. If I do that, the audience is going to lose interest. They're not going to care. But before you can even say yes and, you got to listen. You got to listen. The famous music producer Quincy Jones quoted Abraham Lincoln once, who said, God gave you two ears and one mouth, use them proportionally, right? So listen twice as much as you speak. And if I don't listen to that scene partner and catch that they're handing me a candlestick, the whole scene falls apart. Well, trust me when I say that with leadership, it's the same. And I've read all these different models about emotionally intelligent leadership. I actually have a book on leading with emotional intelligence, where you look at these things that leaders need. And trust me, just like a good improv scene, listening is the first thing. Listening is the first thing. If you're not listening to the people that follow you, you're not really leading. You might be managing, you might be bartering, you might be demanding, but you're not really leading, right? And so that listening piece, it's fundamental in an improv situation, and it's fundamental in leadership. And then two, the teamwork piece. I mean, there's been many times, and I was not the best at this as an improv comedian. I got better in time, but one of the things you learn is to sort of take a fall for your team. In other words, there's opportunities to lean in and make the joke, but if you know your scene got to go another 2 minutes, and you know your joke is going to sort of end what's happening, break up what's happening, you sometimes got to take the fall so your team can get the glory, right? And that's another thing that great leaders do. And it's not quite that dramatic always, but leaders who are willing to not be in the spotlight, leaders who are willing to take a little extra heat so that their team can get appreciated for their work, right? And so that's just two right off the bat. But the listening and the not just sharing of credit, but using yourself as a leader as a pawn, using yourself as a leader as a piece to get to something bigger, not just to get your ego stroked or get your resume padded or whatever. So those are two things that right off the page just are parallels between good leadership and good improv.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, what you're saying is so exciting for somebody like me, because I find myself just sitting here listening, taking notes, and wondering, how could I improve with having improv in my life? And I've always thought of it as being so interesting. Growing up, fascinated with whose line is it anyways?
Yeah.
Fascinated with these movies where you can tell that they're just running off script. They're given the opportunity, but all these things stemmed from starting with improv.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's what it does too is it just flexes different muscles in your brain, right?
Mm.
And that's the thing is, we all go through, at least in the US, we go through the K-12 system where most of us sit in desks in rows, and the way we learn is somebody gives us information and then we regurgitate it on a test, and then we write a paper, and then we get a grade, and we keep going. But that's only exercising certain muscles in the brain, right? But when you are up on a stage in front of bright hot lights, and you and your scene partner are up there, and the coach in the improv club says, okay, audience, we need a celebrity, and they say Nicki Minaj. I'm like, okay, cool, Nicki Minaj is gonna be involved in this. And they're like, name an interesting place in the world, and it's like Portugal. Okay, cool, so it's in Portugal. And they're like, name something yummy, and somebody says peanut butter. And so suddenly we got to do a scene about Nicki Minaj in Portugal with peanut butter, and we got to make it authentic. We got to make it believable. We've got to have some intercultural awareness, because if me and my scene partner are both white dudes, we got to think, oh gosh, we have to lean in with some credibility that shows respect first, so this doesn't seem like a caricature or whatever. Um, and so it definitely just exercises a different part of your brain, that creative part. Here's the other thing, though. I do a lot of work with the Myers-Briggs personality type and whatever, and certain people, and I think I think you probably know this. I think most of your listeners probably know this. Certain people are divergent thinkers, creative thinkers. Some people are just built like that. But one of the things I learned doing improv is even people who aren't built like that, they can learn it. They can learn it. Like, that's powerful when you think about it, because well before I did improv, I was doing keynote speeches and whatnot, and I was pretty good. I was pretty. I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I was, I had some presence, right? Improv went from pretty good to like fantastic, but then also I know people who are not good public speakers who've gone through this process and have really, really awakened that part of their brain. And it takes time and it takes reps. It's just like lifting weights or whatever. It takes the more reps you get, the better. But I'm convinced that, especially on the public speaking side, on all that, that you don't have to be a born public speaker. You don't have to be a born gift of gab type person. You can actually cultivate these skills, and improv is one of the best ways to do it, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how, so who is improv for then? Who exactly do you think that should step into a comedy store and try improv?
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who, anybody who wants to lead other people, but not just that, but, it's made me a better spouse, right? It's made me a better dad. It's made me a better, if you think about it, okay, so I'm going to zoom back to 2020 for a second. Pandemic, right? I got a computer. No one's loving it. It's rough, and there were days when, somebody's coming to fix the furnace, and then one kid is crying because he's messed up an assignment, and the other kid's having tech issues on his laptop. All the things are happening, and I've got to get on a Zoom meeting with a client, right? Where I've got to balance, how do I navigate all this distraction and still stay focused? And trust me when I say improv helps that. There was one gig I did. I did a workshop up in New Hampshire. And this is so funny. And the workshop was about intercultural stuff. So race and gender and these kinds of things. And I asked them, I said, hey, who's going to be in the room? Like, did you get a registration for who's going to be involved? Because my assumption about New Hampshire is that it was going to be a lot of white people like me. That's what I thought I would see in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, they did not ask in the registration race, or they didn't ask a lot of demographics. So I had my presentation ready for what I thought was my kind of picture of a New Hampshire crowd. Got in the room. Oh my gosh, no, so much more racially diverse, way more, because Boston, I guess, is right down the road and New York is not that far. And so literally I had 30 minutes on my laptop to change my whole game plan, because the audience was way different from what I imagined. And the content was similar, but I had to shift it. And that moment is a moment where all of my intercultural background, all of my improv background, everything showed up at the right moment. And that was one of the best gigs I've ever done. And which is funny because technically I wasn't really prepared in a way, right? I was prepared for the wrong crowd, if that makes sense. And so like, what it does is it makes you zoom out and think about your own thinking. When you mentioned Whose Line Is It Anyway, they record about an hour of content, and then they edit and they give us the best 22 minutes in an episode.
Yeah.
On stage, we don't get to do that. On stage, there's no editing. On stage, it's an hour show, and it's live the whole time. We don't ever get to cut, like say, oh, audience, forget what you just saw. We're going to edit that and read. No, there's no edits. And so even though the people on Whose Line are brilliant, they all cut their teeth. They all got started doing it live on stages before it was on TV. And that's when you really test if you're good,
I love that, man. And I feel as though, I feel inspired just listening to what you were saying, because I run an hour-long live show 3 times a week. And this is a type of improv, but I love the community aspect of what you're saying, right? And I believe with improv, you're there to make people laugh, right? Because you're at a comedy shop, and you want people to be entertained. And so as you're telling me this, I'm thinking of all the different ways that I could utilize that skill and continue to build that muscle. And it is really a common theme within this podcast itself that we discuss all the time, is like, people are watching me flex this muscle over and over. They're watching me grow. They're watching me become stronger at my craft. And I would never know the amount of gosh, I don't know if I would call it growth or expansion or progress that I've made if I didn't have this stuff on wax. Going back to look at my first
Yeah.
episode and being like, oh gosh,
Yes.
I really,
Yes.
really have no idea.
It's amazing when you can go back and look. And I can tell just from talking to you that, because one of the things you do as a podcaster, and I do, I'm not even kidding. I've done 3 podcasts this week already, right? And not all podcasters are as are necessarily really clued in on the active listening, where there are some podcasters where I know they're reading questions from a sheet. Sometimes they've sent them to me ahead of time, but I can feel that they're reading them from a sheet. And then there's other ones who maybe they read them from a sheet, but then they're listening and they develop a follow-up question on the fly and then ask that question. I can tell you're doing this in real time. And that right there is its own skill, right? Where you are listening to me, not just to respond, but listening to me to craft another question that can go deeper or go in a different direction. That is improv, right? That is, you're not just going down the formula of this question, this question, this question. Maybe you get to question number 2 and I say something that sparks a new idea with you and you take it in a new direction. That's a form of improv, right? And so I think people who in the podcast community, people who do podcasts, also would really benefit from taking an improv class, or, I have a book about it now, which, the book's not gonna, it's not the same as practicing, right? It's like learning to play trumpet. You can't just read a book and then play trumpet. You gotta get the trumpet in the practice room and start blowing on it,
Yeah.
But there are things you can practice at home. There are things that, the people who run the Idiot Box, the Idiot Box is the comedy club where I did comedy for almost a decade. It's called the Idiot Box. And it's funny, half the troupe had PhDs, which is hilarious. That was called the Idiot Box.
Yeah.
We had like a British literature PhD dude. We had a geology dude. The owner of the club has a PhD in neurobiology from this up and coming place called Duke University. Like, dude's like brilliant, and he runs a comedy club, but it's called the Idiot Box, and being part of that community was so huge and so cool. And 2, one thing that, when I mentioned I do comedy, people are like, oh, you're a stand-up comedian. I'm like, no, stand-up terrifies me. I mean, I've done stand-up, I think I did it once or twice, like an open mic night here or there, but that's, stand-up is a monologue, right? You bring the jokes, you tell the jokes. If they're not funny, that's 100% on you. When it's improv and you ask the audience for suggestions, they are sharing in the creation of this thing, right? And so they are, if they tell, if we say, give us a celebrity, and they say, Mike Tyson, and half the audience doesn't know who Mike Tyson is, they share some of the responsibility in what we're building. And so it's a relationship more than a prepared speech, if you will, right? And so, but the feel you get from it's pretty darn cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that is so cool, because I feel as though you're talking about having the audience members throw ideas at you, and it brought me back to thinking about watching these comedians and how culturally diverse they are in their intellect.
Yep.
They are so smart when it comes to different regions and different things. And that comes from years of exactly what you're talking about. And now it makes so much more sense, because I feel as though we as Americans don't really learn that much about the rest of the world. Not in school, not unless you're like really involved and love what you're reading about history and other parts of the world. But there's only so many ways to get that information, and if you're not chasing after it and wanting to learn more. So when an audience member is talking about a place in India, or like you said, like all the different type of food, and you're like, dang, I know nothing about that. Or yes, okay, I've got something there. And there's this fun balance there that I think is really interesting with your quick wit, but also your knowledge of the world.
It totally is. And I'm the kid of an immigrant. Like, my dad's right off the boat. So I have a little different relationship with the US. Some people might, but you're right that, and so, like, I do speeches and workshops all over the country. I only did improv really in North Carolina. And so when I'm doing keynotes and stuff, I have certain jokes I tell. I have certain stories that I tell that are funny stories, and different ones land differently, different places. So one of the things I lean into sometimes is barbecue. how there's a regionality to barbecue,
Mm.
and how Texas is very adamant that it's brisket, beef brisket, and St. Louis is very adamant, and Memphis is very adamant that it's sticky pulled pork, and North Carolina and South Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when I'm doing a gig, when I'm doing a workshop in California, they don't care. The people in California are like, when I tell my regional barbecue jokes or whatever, they're like, yeah, okay, that's interesting, but that's not very like, I'm not funny. That's not funny, because over here in California, sure, we enjoy barbecue, but we don't fight over it. And I'm like, yeah, well, if
Yeah.
you got some Texans and some North Carolinians and some St. Louis folks in the room together, it could be some, and so understanding the culture of who you're speaking to, understanding, and then being humble in your own culture, right? I do a lot of intercultural work with my consulting work where, a lot of people think that intercultural competence is about reading books by people who are different than you. And that's great. That's great. But one of the things I think is the best is making fun of your own cultures, right? Like, what is it that I can find funny about being a white dude? What are the funny things I can find about that? Because that's going to help me grow more than, necessarily just picking up, a book or watching a movie by someone who's different than me. That's good too. But I got this friend, I'm in a historically Black graduate fraternity. I know that sounds weird, but the historically Black fraternities and sororities are more active after college. And I was invited. There was some mix up in the paperwork, and they accidentally got a white dude in there. And so, but there's this guy, Jeff, and every time we go to an event, I give him the white guy moment of the week. I said, Jeff, you ready for your white guy moment of the week? It's like, yeah, hit me. And we were at some place where they had coffee and donuts. I said, I knew they had coffee and donuts, but here's the whitest white thing you're going to hear all week. I brought my own mug with some oat milk in it, because I didn't think they were going to have any oat milk. And he goes, yeah, dude, that's the whitest white thing I've heard all week. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, nice.
And so, like that right there, the ability to laugh at yourself, laugh at your own culture, is much more potent and powerful than me trying to develop intercultural competence by picking up books by Latino authors that I don't have experience, or it starts with being able to laugh at yourself and laugh at your own culture. It's huge,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into what you were talking about. You're finding out this kind of organically that, oh man, this improv is really impacting my life in other ways. And I'm taking the information that I'm learning and putting that into my leadership, into these keynotes, and it's making me progress. It's making me a better leader, a better speaker, a better individual, father, all these different aspects of your life. You're flexing this muscle that's just making it better. So let's talk about your keynotes. And
Yeah.
I mean, you've done, the TED Talk and all these incredible keynotes. You're traveling all around. So I'd like to talk about that portion of things, your business, your keynotes, and what you're bringing to the stage.
Sure. So, I mean, for one, one of the things is I'm very intuitive, right? And so, it's funny. I've never had a written down keynote speech. Even my TEDx talk was not written down. There's about a 2-minute section of my TEDx talk that I literally made up on the spot, which a lot of my fellow people in that cohort, they had not done a lot of public speaking. They got coached and all these things. But for me, you read an audience's energy, sort of. You feel an audience's energy. You tell a story or two that you've told before, and depending on the laugh you get, or the lack of laugh you get, or the that audience says, or the shifting in the seats or whatever, I sort of intuit where I could go next. Something else, and I know I talk about gender and race some. I also do a lot about the Myers-Briggs extroverts and introverts. I'm an extroverted person. And I tell my wife, I'm like, when I get up on stage and I look out there, and if it's 50 people or if it's 500 people, I think to myself, if I can get the introverts on board, if I can get an introvert who's a Black person who's also a woman, if I can get the introverted Black women in the audience on board with what I'm doing, because that's 3 things that are different than me. I'm an extrovert, I'm a white person, I'm a dude, right? If I can cross those 3 boundaries with authenticity and care, and they know that I'm speaking to them in a way that reaches them, the rest of the audience is going to come along, my friends, because almost everybody else in the audience is going to have 1 or 2 things more in common with me. And if I can really, really, with authenticity, speak across those three cultural divides, the keynote's going to take care of itself, right? That's and it's and again, you could slice and dice this a lot of different ways. You could say, are there deaf people in my audience who are Latino, right? Or whatever, whoever might be in the room. And so just challenging yourself to think about who in the audience do you know that if you reach, the rest of the audience will come along. And so, and it's hilarious because in my book, my newest book is called Improv Comedy and the Art of Leadership. And I admit in the book, on my improv team, I was not the best improviser, right? If our team was, I tell people if it was a basketball team, I was not a starter, right? I wasn't the towel boy, but I was like the seventh, eighth guy in the rotation. Like I got some playing time, but I wasn't one of the stars.
Mm.
But here's the thing: keynote speakers notoriously are not that funny. And so when the training with these brilliant improv people for the better part of a decade, the bar is high when people pay to see comedy. When people are at a conference and are being told, this is your keynote speaker, and you're not paying to see comedy, and then they come out and they're funny, it's like, wait a second, I was not expecting this, right? And so the bar is different, right? The bar is different for if they expect comedy versus if they expect the next boring keynote speaker that they've had 100 times. And that's why this works, because, and two, I mean, a lot of times I'm on my outline and somebody says something, like I say, does anybody, I get interactive about it. And the courage to get interactive comes from the fact that I can stand on stage and ask you for, a celebrity, an emotion, and an accent, and we can turn that into a scene.
Mm.
If I'm talking about leadership stuff, if I'm talking about communication, if I'm talking about other aspects of leading, which is stuff I know really, really well, going with those questions on the fly is so much easier because I've done it with things that are harder. I've stretched my brain in the moment in ways that are way harder in front of a crowd that expects you to be funny.
Yes.
So when I get in front of a crowd that doesn't expect you to be funny, oh my gosh, get ready, my friends.
I love that, man. There's a lot of things that I want to break down on what you just said there. Is so interesting to me, and I'm sure the audience is feeling the same, but I do have to acknowledge the people that are out there right now. We got some legends in the chat that are riding for the People Helping People community. Your boy B is out there. We see you. Thank you for being here. He gives us a salute. Kenny Johnson 422, we see you. He says, what's up, guys? We'll give you one of those too, brother. Welcome in. Rich, another legend in the house. Holy smokes. Coming in droves. Welcome in. We appreciate you. Lars Ward 345, he says, just got home. Good to be here. Good to see you. Beautiful. We just had to show some love to the people real quick. But I loved what you were saying when you're on stage. And I think that this is an important sentiment for a lot of people. When I'm listening to you, I'm obviously just, it seems like everybody does this, right? You take what somebody's saying and you integrate it into your own life and see how those things either ring true or go against the grain. And when you're talking about getting on stage, the only time I've ever done that is performing. So I had the veil of a guitar or a microphone to stand behind. And I think that having a mic with nothing but my voice and speaking is a scary thought. But with the mentality that you said of wanting to reach the people in the polar opposite side of the room, meaning somebody polar opposite of you, and getting them on board with what you're saying, is if you have them on board with what you're saying, then everybody in the room can come together and feel the same. So you're really pinpointing, you're not really brushing with a broad brushstroke. You're pinpointing somebody that's the furthest on the other side in order to gather everybody together. I think that that's amazing.
It's one of those things because sometimes in workshops, and for your listeners, think about the last time at work you were told, hey, we're going to go to a leadership seminar. We're going to do this thing. I can go ahead and tell you, every introvert that you work with is like, can I cuss on your podcast? I don't know. Every introvert is like, oh, it's like, oh shit, every introvert's like, wait, I gotta spend 8 hours in a room with all the people, and no. And
Yeah.
so to me, even when I'm doing workshops, right, if I'm not on stage, I'm like, I got to spend my first hour or two making sure that I'm proving to the introverts, hey, this is going to be a welcoming and safe environment for introverts. It is,
Mm.
right? I get where you're coming from. I'm not going to put any of y'all on the spot. I'm going to do a few small group things. I'm going to hand out some little cards so you can organize your thoughts before participating in the conversation, building my workshops so that the introverts have a ramp, so that by after lunch they're like, yeah, this isn't as bad as these things normally are, and then they'll start coming out of their shell a little bit, right? And so
Yes.
it's this whole back in my previous life, and some of the folks that listen to you, I'm sure, especially out in Arizona, high ropes courses and low ropes courses and team building courses and those kinds of things, I did that a lot as a young professional. And there's a whole art and science to, you get 12 people and they have to get from this log to this log using this pole and this rope or whatever the thing is. And then the facilitators, the good facilitators, get you in a circle and process it and get this deep learning out of it, right? There's a whole science to it. And part of what they know in that industry, in the high ropes course, low ropes course, is you want to push someone right up to the edge of their comfort zone, but not too much further. Right
Mm.
up to the edge, but not too much further. If you put them to the edge, that's where the deep learning is going to happen. If you push them too far, they're going to shut down and they're not going to learn, right? And so same with a keynote, same with a workshop, is you've got to know how deep can I get before I have to back out. And two, I'll tell you, as someone with a background in comedy who also does a lot of work in intercultural conversations, that's clutch, man, because we're in a polarized world, right? And so can I lean in a little bit on race for a second? Can I lean in a little bit on gender for a second? And then if it gets a little tense, have my joke about my white boy getting my oat milk latte, right? Or whatever, right? Where finding those points where you can push people a little further than they're comfortable with, but not so far that they shut down and stop learning, right? And so, it's there's an art and science to it, and I'm so thankful that I did that kind of stuff early in my career as well, which isn't exactly improv, but that plus improv those two tools together help a lot. Yeah.
Mm. Gosh, I'm loving what you're saying, and I'm thinking that there's just so many different ways to broaden your horizons, and your approach to help people find the ways to broaden theirs is a very interesting one. It's very unique. And so I want to talk a little bit about what is actually happening in your seminars. Why is somebody going to your seminars?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of my most common ones that, so businesses all over the country and sometimes universities and sometimes town and city governments, they'll bring us in, and a lot of them are dealing with the same kind of things. They're dealing with, how do we work in a polarized environment, right? The political thing. And I have tools that I can give teams. I'm like, look, there's always going to be political difference, but you work together. How do we work together? How do we work together when there are those differences? How do we work together? The Myers-Briggs thing, I have a lot of this, extroverts and introverts, right? And I love what you said about the guitar and having that barrier in between, because a shocking amount of Broadway performers, musicians, TV and movie actors are introverts, but the comfort of a role or the comfort of an instrument as a barrier between them and the audience gives them a certain level of comfort. But I'll tell you one funny thing that I do in some of my seminars is I'll take the introverts and the extroverts, I'll break them to either side of the room, right? And I'll turn to the extroverts and I'll say, how many of y'all know the phrase resting Mitch face with an M? And they go, what? I'm like, resting Mitch face. They're like, nope. I'm like, correct. But you know what it rhymes with, right? And they're like, yep. I'm like, uh-huh, uh-huh. Now look across the room at all the introverts and look at the introverts who are women and ask yourself, why is it we have that stereotype for introvert women and we don't have one for men who are introverts? What's that about, right? Is that fair? Does that seem reasonable? And it challenges some of the mindsets of, I tell people I've been alive 51 years. And let me just tell you, man, you want to know the amount of times a stranger has come up to me and said, oh, honey, you need to smile more. Never, never has that happened to me. Does that happen to most women that I work with on a weekly basis? Probably, right? So I'm starting with introvert and extrovert, but then I'm like, hey, in addition to being an extrovert or an introvert, you also have a gender, right? And those two things bump up against each other. They intersect each other. They inform each other. And so if you really want to lead, you've got to understand that, right? And so if you're leading a team and one of your colleagues is talking about how the woman at the front desk isn't friendly, and I'm like, well, okay, that could be true. Maybe there are unfriendly people here, but could you just be projecting? And could she just have a regular face that's not smiling at that moment? And is that okay, right? So I do a lot with personality to help leaders. I do a lot with change management. So change management is, our organization just got bought by another company, and there's a lot of things changing. How do we manage that? I do the improv thing with executives, because executives are very tuned into executive presence or leadership presence. How do you stand in front of a group and command a room, right? Yeah, and so, but I mean, our company does. The bottom line is, my wife. I tell my wife, I'm like, as long as there are bad bosses, my company, Adaptive Challenge Consulting, we're going to have work. And so, as long as there are bosses who, and you know this, and I think your listeners know this too, when getting a new manager, a new boss, a new director, whatever it is, 9 times out of 10, they pick whoever was the best assistant manager, the best assistant director. Well, friends, I got to tell you, typically, if you're an assistant manager, your skill set, if you're the best assistant manager, your skill set probably has to do with customers or clients or something facing external. And then when you become the manager, suddenly you're dealing with schedules and budgets and payroll and conflict. It's a whole different job. And yet we just usually take the best assistant manager and promote them. And that's a problem. That's a problem, because no one's like, hey, time out. Hey, go take a year and go learn about how to lead and manage. Like, nobody does that, right? And so that's why my company exists. And what we're able to do is we're able to give other companies or universities or cities that time out, so that those folks who are being forced to lead, who may never have been trained to lead, they may have been trained as a chemist, they may have been trained as a machinist, they may have been trained as a, somebody who does, one of my clients is a flavor company. I'm not making this up. They have 241 versions of vanilla. And so they have like a halal specialist and a kosher specialist, which, of course, if you're a flavor company, I guess you have that. I never would have imagined that you would have that just in your company, right? And so, I think that so that's a lot of what we do, is we help leaders, because typically people are thrown into leadership without training, Yeah.
Yeah, again, rings true. I've been put into the managerial role or team lead and had people underneath me, and there was a long transitional period of being like, "Oh, I'm not a friend anymore," and finding, okay, but where is that center line going from being side by side a coworker with somebody to now being their boss and being the disciplinarian, and finding that there can be a balance there. But how do I walk that line? And it took me a very long time to try and figure out how to have the right types of communication with these people. And really, it was so painful to get through to that point. It was so painful because I felt like I lost a core group of friends at the time, and felt as though I was getting pressure from higher up to discipline and to find faults in the people that I cared for. And so it took a very long time to be like, okay, there is a balance and there is a right and a wrong way to walk this. And I feel for people that are on both ends of that, the people that do get promoted that only know boots on the ground type of work, and then the people that have their friends or people around them that are promoted and feel the backlash of that, where either there's too much of this authoritarian vibe, and they're like, now I can go in and implement everything that right, and that's a tough thing to see and to feel on both ends. But also, I think for a lot of people, if they've ever been promoted, there's a sense of isolation to a degree, because
Slowly.
right, yeah, you were amongst these people where there was a bit of a team, and now you are paid more to point out all their flaws and tell them how they can get better. And there's certain expectations that are, those trickle down onto you, and you have to trickle that down onto them. And it's a tough line to walk. Looks like we
Yeah,
lost him.
it's interesting because what you're oh no, are you still there?
Okay,
What you're
yeah,
saying
we're
is
here.
spot on. Yeah, what you're saying is spot on. And two quick stories. I mean, one is, I was in that situation once where literally a week before, all my colleagues were like, hey Alan, after work we're going to the bar. Come on out and join us. To the next week, it was, hey Alan, we're going to the bar, but we'll see you tomorrow. And I'm like, wait, so I'm not invited? Like, we'll see you tomorrow. And like, another example though, I'll tell you, I had a great assistant director of my office, and she was complaining that one of the other team members wasn't pulling her weight. And I knew that this assistant director eventually was going to be a leader and run her own department somewhere or whatever. And so I saw an opportunity, and I said, because she kept coming to me, like, as though as the boss, I could just fix it, right? That humans aren't human, that humans are machine. No, I can't. And so her name was Amanda, and Amanda is awesome, and she's up in, I think, Seattle now. And I said to Amanda, I said, okay, and it took me about a month to get here, but I said, hey, this person that you're worried that I'm not getting to be efficient enough, congratulations, you are now her supervisor. And they both hated it. They hated it, and they both grew from it, right? Because I think what Amanda needed to learn was humans have human nature, and even when you're the boss, you don't just say jump and they say how high. You gotta get in with the emotionally intelligent parts of things to motivate people. And then the other employee, who honestly wasn't as efficient as she could have been, she had this very enthusiastic new supervisor, right? I also like the thing you said though about kind of the authoritarian style. There's a lot of that left over from the Industrial Revolution, man, and we got to change.
Well, the
There's a
real
lot.
question is who hurt
Yeah.
that person in my eyes.
Who
Like,
what?
where does that stems from a childhood trauma and feeling of not being enough or whatever it may be. But I know, I know the people that have been in those roles and seen who they are and eventually got to know them and hearing their stories and their backgrounds. And I'm like, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean that we've all navigated that, right? And so again, just like you said, when I'm handing to Amanda this other person, this person has, the particular person she was supervising was a piano player who then later in her life had a stroke and lost the use of her left hand. And how
Oof.
tragic is that, right? How frustrating is that? And then recareered and became and worked in our office. And all of us are whole people, right? That's the thing. We're all whole people. One of my colleagues in my consulting team,
What do you mean
Dr.
by
We
whole
call her
people?
Dr. What I mean is that, so I spent 20 years working at universities, and I've spent other times in my life working in corporate. Corporate thinks of people as cogs in a system. Universities and colleges think of students as vessels that we need to put information into. Both of those are incomplete. They're not wrong, they're just incomplete, because if I think of my student only as a vessel that if I'm teaching a psychology class or an education class or a leadership class, and I only see them as a receptacle for some bullet points on my slide to give me back later in the form of a test or a paper, I'm missing that person has a grandmother they just lost, or they have a boyfriend they just broke up with, or they have a disease that I'm not aware of that affects their life every day. And so when I say whole people, what I mean is that businesses, city governments, educational institutions, each conceive of the people we serve as sort of one thing, but we are all so much more. We are all so much more. Disney World, and this is interesting. There's a homeless shelter in the city next to me where I worked a little bit as a high school kid. I volunteered down there, and it works with homeless men. And then Disney World, which is like the happiest place on earth or whatever. One thing that's really interesting is these two organizations, this homeless shelter and Disney World, they both use the same exact language to talk about those they serve. So you would think Disney would think, oh, these are customers, and that the homeless shelter run by social workers would think, oh, these are clients. Both of them use the word guest. They are guests. And when you think about that, about the people in the worst time of their life, they're homeless. the people at presumably one of the better times in their life. They're on vacation at Disney World. When you think that, when you understand and think about someone as a guest, that reminds you of how complete of a person they are. Guests need a meal. They need a place to stay. They need to be welcomed. They have these other things. And so that's one of the things that I think when I say whole people, every entity looks at a person as a customer or a client or whatever, but they're people. They are people who are coming to your organization to do business or to learn or whatever the case is, get medical care or whatever. They're not just a cog in the system, right? And when you understand that as a leader, the people you lead, they have complete backstories too, right? And some of that, if you lead them well, some of that they will share with you, and some of that they may never share with you because it's not your business, you know. And so if you know that there's enough stuff out there that's not your business that could still be part of their life, that can make you a more humble leader, and get past that authoritarian stuff. Because that authoritarian leadership style, unless you're a ER doctor, or unless you're like a in the military, like advancing on a beachhead, like those are the places for that kind of leadership. Everywhere else, let's have conversations. Let's get consensus. Let's democratize our leadership when there's not a crisis in front of us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well said. We are coming up on our hour. I will let this go a little bit longer, but I have one main question for you, and I think that this is going to be a great takeaway for the people listening. Before we dive into that, I want to say thank you for being here. I've enjoyed this conversation. Your outlook on life is very unique. Your business and your brand and the way that you speak is very unique. And I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I just wanted to say that first of all. But before we move on to, yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to your book, which I'm very excited to talk about, I would like to know, being in your position and seeing so many people stepping into leadership roles, what advice would you have for somebody that is stepping into a leadership role to fast track them into being a better leader?
Yeah, well, for one thing, understand that your fast track might not be as fast as you want.
Sure.
That's one thing, and
Patience.
you mentioned it earlier. You mentioned how long it took you to kind of get that vibe going, right? But if
School
you
of
do want
Hard
to kind of, yeah, School of Hard Knocks. I think if you do want to get better quicker, number one is listen, listen, listen. As a matter of fact, at the end of your business day, jot down, get a little journal or some sticky notes or whatever, and jot down the five top things you think you heard that day. The top five things you think you heard. We don't pause and listen as closely as we should. One thing that's interesting, I mentioned I'm a kid of an immigrant. My dad's German right off the boat. And Germans, one of the things that's different from English and Spanish is Germans put their verbs at the end of their sentence. You don't think this matters, but let me just tell you, Germans don't interrupt each other nearly as much as Spanish speakers and English speakers do. Because I'm going to tell you a sentence, and I'm going to say it in English, but I'm going to use German sentence structure. Here's the sentence. Me and your sister, with 2 pounds of Jell-O and a bunny rabbit, did a photo shoot at the mall. So you notice the verb isn't, you don't know what's happening with your sister and the Jell-O and the bunny rabbit. You have no idea what's going on. You got to wait until the very last word. And Germans use this sentence structure, but you know who else does? Yoda. Yoda uses this sentence structure, puts the verbs at the end. He does, right? Always puts the verbs at the end. And so when I say listening, and as a leader, write down the top 5 things you think you heard that day and do that daily, because it's going to challenge you to, number one, listen more intently in the moment. And number 2, reflect on what you're hearing. Because listening is the very first lesson in all of leadership, is you've got to really, really listen and listen deeply. Get used to use the phrase, if I hear you, you're saying this. Or if I get you, this is what you're getting at, right? Throw it back to folks. My wife's a counselor. They call it active listening. If somebody says something, say, I think I get you. Is this what you mean? Saying those kinds of phrases, number one, helps you listen. Number 2, helps the person in front of you feel heard. That is a whole different thing. Listening is one skill. Making someone in front of you feel heard is a separate skill. And leaders got to do both of those things. Because if you listen closely, but don't clue anybody in that you've heard them,
Yeah.
If you clue people in that you heard them, but you actually weren't listening, you got to listen deeply. And then you got to say, oh, I hear you. I get you. I understand what you're getting at. There's power. The people who you're trying to lead, that's when they will start following you.
Mm. Gosh, that is so well said. I hate to just like rush this interview along because I'm enjoying this
Okay. It's okay.
conversation, but
Sure.
I guess I was going to segue into your book, but I would like to give you the floor and tell us what you would like us to know before we end the conversation.
Yeah. So just, if you want to get involved with my company, adaptivechallengeconsulting.com. We're very active on LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. I have two books. I published my first two books this year. One of them, which literally just hit like 2 weeks ago, and the Art of Leadership. And so both of these are about, and so it's, the first one is about how do you cultivate emotionally intelligent leadership skills. And the second one is how do you have some fun and learn about improv to become a better leader as well. And so, they're quick, easy reads. One of the things that I have a lot of degrees, but I'm not an academic deep down in my bones. I never was. I almost failed out of college 2 or 3 times. It took me 7 years to finish. I was not a great student. And so I had to sort of scrap and claw my way through grad school. So the good news for you all, if you get my book, is that I'm taking doctoral level leadership stuff, but I'm just presenting it in everyday language with stories and interesting anecdotes and parallels that are, I think, very accessible. And so that's one of the things that I think I do pretty well, and I think this comes through in the books too. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Hold on, ladies and gentlemen. Yeehaw. Come on. So good. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And I hope it inspires some people to, one, take some action and blend some different genres of life sometimes. When you're out there and you're trying different things, I think it's totally okay to find something that may feel polar opposite of something else, and finding out that there's so many similarities and so many lessons to learn where you can integrate the two and move forward. And you've really paved the way for that. And it's something so special, man.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, once upon a time, before the 1980s, there was no such thing as Reese's peanut butter cups. And then one day, someone's like, you know what? Peanut butter is pretty good, and chocolate's pretty good. There's a whole world before Reese's peanut butter cups existed. How is that a thing? Yeah, so like you just said, find some things that you might not think go together and play, experiment, have some fun. Yeah.
Absolutely. Before we let you go, everybody, all the links to everything that he has. Alan Mueller, incredible. If you want to get his books, if you want to follow his social medias, if it's something that has inspired you, share it to your friends. A couple of comments before we let you go. There's some people out here looking to interact with us. Man, a lot here. A lot. Holy smokes. Thank you guys for stepping in. Sorry I didn't get to your comments while we were having the conversation, but it was just too good. Let's see. Rich says they have to see how far they could push you before they break you. That way they can train you at your limits, so to speak.
Yeah. Yep. It's that thing. You don't want fight or flight. You don't want to push them past their limits. You want to get them right to that edge. But yeah, 100%.
Yeah, very interesting. Nice comment. Thank you for that, Rich. Kayla Coffee Studio says, I am an introvert who plays a role of a bartender sometimes. She does a good job too. That's her improv class.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got out here. Rich also says people don't quit jobs because they don't like them. They leave due to bad management. I want to give you one of these, Rich.
Rich, high five, Rich. High five right there. You got it, man. And that's not just anecdotal. There's research on that people leave because of bad bosses. That's the number one reason. Yep.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And again, I just love when you guys bring up these topics and I start thinking about my own experiences and just inserting those into those experiences. And yeah, man, I've every job I've left has been, either some authoritarian coming in and stomping his foot or somebody not giving a crap about what's actually happening at the job. So well said, Rich. We appreciate it. The inspired athlete out there, welcome in, brother. He says, love the show. We appreciate you, man. Rich says, thank you for allowing us to hear your words, Dr. Mueller. Have a blessed day. We appreciate that, Rich. Thanks so much. All right. Before this is too good. This is a great question. The inspired athlete asks,
You'll have to have me back again is what, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll have to have a round two. One last question before we let you go. It says, what's an inspired action you'd like us to take?
Oh, an inspired action I'd like you to take is to think about something that is part of one of your cultures and learn to laugh at it a lot. That's an inspired action. I think on Twitter about 9 years ago, and I'm not really on Twitter much anymore, but there was this great thing. White people ask black people anything and black people ask white people anything. It was hilarious. The funniest thing was some black person said, hey, white people, why did you conquer half of the world looking for spices and yet you don't use spices in your food? And I thought that was the funniest thing ever. And if I can laugh at myself and not take myself too seriously, people will respond. Because just like you just said, you had a boss who was a jerk. They took themselves way too seriously. They weren't invested in the people. They were invested in the ego, right? So get comfortable laughing at yourself and not taking yourself too seriously, because we're all works in progress. We're all going to make mistakes. And instead of shaming ourselves, lean into that. Lean into it like it's to be expected, like you're going to make a mistake every day, and just learn and rock and roll. Keep going. Yeah.
Great. Beautiful answer. Thank you for that question, Aaron, over there at the Inspired Athlete. Ladies and gentlemen, our friend, Alan Mueller. We'll have to get you back on the show. We'll catch you on the next one.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
All right, brother. You take care.
All right.
Yeehaw. Man, I took a lot from that conversation. I hope you guys did too. There were so many interesting things that he was saying, and him talking about all these different cultures, I think stems a lot from, well, when you step into a new job, what's the first thing when it comes to HR, right? There's like these do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs. And I always thought that comedians, when I'm watching them on stage, did such a good job at, it didn't matter their race or their cultural preferences, but always did such a good job at educating themselves about other places in the world. And that education allowed them to make fun of everybody the same and also point fingers at themselves. And so for him to take not only leadership, but having the improv side of things and leadership and come together, I think that's what he's saying with a lot of inspiration that let me rephrase that. What he is utilizing is a lot of these different aspects of his life of experience and bringing that to the stage, right? And to integrate comedy with leadership is such a cool melting pot of inspiration for the people. So I hope you guys got a lot from that conversation. I know I did. And Rich is out there. I know you are. And he would just throw a fit if I didn't tell you guys to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're not watching on YouTube, go over there. We're trying to run up our watch hours over there. But huge shout out again to Alan Mueller. I have left all his links down below if you want to get in touch with him. And if you want to get his books, fantastic. Get his books. And if nothing else, just go show him support on the social media aspect of things. Let's see. We got a few comments before we go. Your boy B says, will you be doing the postcast tonight? The post podcast. Yeah, I think he's wondering about. I don't think I'll be doing that tonight, man. I've got so much on my plate. All good problems to have. But yeah. There's a lot happening in the background right now. So no post podcast But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to Aaron Mueller. Thank you to the amazing community that's out there leaving comments and questions. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And as always, we'll see you Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Go show somebody some love and be people helping people. Deuces.
Yeah. What's everybody fighting for? Why can't people help people? That's the question.